As I took all this in and said, well, here I am in Morgantown. I didn't expect, of course, to, avoid racism. I'd be a jackass if I thought I could avoid racism living in the United States. But I did understand that it wasn't so bad, but that things were changing. Well, I then go back to the history department, and I hear someone talking about a graduate student in the history department, European-American fellow, who is teaching some of his students that, to use his terms again, blacks, and this is interesting, Slavic peoples are inherently inferior because they are not Homo sapiens. Now, I started to ask myself, now, who does this sound like? If you know a little bit about the history of Germany, the rise of the Nazi Party and so forth, the Germans created this fallacious notion of racial supremacy, defining themselves as Aryans, when in fact the Aryans are Iranians, but they left that out. They're really talking about Nordic peoples, and they talked about the Germans. But they developed this to justify their going into the Slavic countries of Eastern Europe in order to take over. Now, I thought that was interesting, because usually, people just kind of beat up on quote-unquote black folks. But this young man said Slavic peoples too. So I'm saying that this is really getting interesting out here in terms of how the structure is changing. But then I also started to think to myself, I wonder how much this idiot knows about his own history. Because for me, my rationale for deciding to study the Moorish legacy and Moorish history was because I always felt that the best way to silence most Europeans, so-called white folks, was to hit them in the bloodline. And what I mean by that is, if you begin to spend any time studying your own history, I'm speaking now to a European, spend any time studying your own Irish history, your own Scottish history, your own English history, your own Spanish history, your own Italian history, Calabria, anything in Europe, any culture in Europe can be traced to peoples outside of Europe. And one of the greatest influences, not only in blood, but in culture, in the sciences, one of the greatest influences were coming from people known by Europeans as the Moors.